The night air was heavier than usual, as if the desert itself was holding its breath, and then a voice cut through the static of a late-night radio show, trembling, desperate, almost unrecognizable, claiming, "They will never let you see what I saw," and even in that first breath, the listener could sense the terror embedded in every word. It started calmly, with a faint hum of cicadas and the soft rustle of sand across abandoned dunes, painting a serene picture of an ordinary night in Nevada, yet the contrast was immediate. The urgency in the caller's tone ignited a flicker of suspicion, as though the desert were alive, watching, waiting for anyone who dared listen too closely. Details spilled out in halting fragments, flashes of strange lights hovering impossibly above the barren landscape, shadows moving against the wind, and a sensation of time bending, moments stretching into eternity before snapping back, leaving the mind reeling. Each word felt like a breadcrumb leading into a labyrinth of unspoken horrors, yet every pause amplified the tension, forcing the audience to imagine what could provoke such a panic, bridging the ordinary with something profoundly unnatural. The host's questions were gentle, probing, yet every answer revealed more questions, drawing listeners deeper into the unknown, leaving them dangling between disbelief and fascination, hearts quickening as they pictured themselves alone, under the same cold stars, enveloped by silence, the vast emptiness suddenly threatening. Even as the voice faltered and hinted at secrets buried under layers of sand and secrecy, the desert became more than a backdrop. It was a character, silent but menacing, holding histories and dangers that humans were never meant to uncover. And in that tension, the first cliffhanger emerged. The caller gasped, their words cut short by a sudden static burst, leaving an unfinished warning that demanded reflection. "If you think you're safe, you're already too close," leaving every listener with a chill crawling up their spine, hearts pounding, minds racing, compelled to ask themselves what they would do if left alone under the same stars, in the same desert, where the line between the seen and the unseen was no longer just a whisper. As night deepened, the desert's calm began to fray at the edges, and travelers along the winding backroads whispered of lights that danced above the dunes, moving in ways that defied explanation, blinking and pulsing like a heartbeat out of sync with the world. Locals, usually wary of strangers, spoke in hushed tones of hikers who vanished without trace, their campsites found empty, gear abandoned, and footprints that abruptly ended in the sand as though swallowed by some unseen force. The ordinary rhythm of wind and sand shifted, replaced by fleeting noises, metallic clinks, distant hums, and unidentifiable echoes that seemed to circle and retreat just beyond perception, pulling the imagination into a space where fear and curiosity entwined. Travelers described shadows that weren't their own, shifting shapes at the periphery of vision, fleeting glimpses of movement that disappeared the moment they were looked at directly, leaving only questions and a gnawing unease that refused to let go. Even the radio host felt the tension ripple through the broadcast, narrating with a quiet urgency as each report layered over the last, building a crescendo of suspense, a sense that the desert itself was concealing more than terrain, something alive, elusive, and observant. And then, before the story could unfold further, the host's voice lowered, deliberate and heavy with promise, hinting at proof collected from eyewitnesses and hidden recordings, proof that could change everything you know about reality, leaving the audience suspended between disbelief and the irresistible pull to hear what came next, hearts tight with anticipation, minds racing with visions of shadows lurking just beyond the light. The trail began innocuously enough, a narrow dirt path winding into the desolate expanse near Area 51, but every step forward seemed to pull the investigators deeper into a landscape that was both familiar and impossibly alien, as if the desert itself were reshaping to conceal its secrets. Abandoned campsites emerged from the sand like ghosts frozen in time, tattered tents, overturned gear, and footprints that ended abruptly in nothingness, signaling that those who had come before them had vanished, leaving behind only fragments of their presence. Scorch marks streaked across the ground and jagged rocks bore strange indentations that defied natural explanation, evidence of technology or forces far beyond ordinary human capability, glinting ominously under the harsh glare of flashlights. Every discovery was layered with unease. Discarded devices buzzed faintly, emitting signals that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the investigators' own quickening heartbeats, and the wind carried whispers that could have been imagined, or warnings. Ordinary desert silence became heavy with the weight of the unknown, each step echoing like a question into the vast emptiness, a reminder that the line between curiosity and danger was razor-thin. As they pushed past signs warning of government surveillance, every instinct screamed caution, yet the pull of what lay beyond was irresistible, a magnetic draw into the unseen. The team's conversations became terse, clipped, shadows of doubt creeping into every word, and the unrelenting desert night seemed to watch, anticipate, and almost judge their intrusion. And then, just when the path appeared empty, a faint metallic glimmer in the distance caught their eyes, an anomaly that refused to fit any rational explanation, demanding closer inspection, a silent dare from the land itself. Would you continue if the government warned you to leave? With hearts pounding and every nerve alert, they pressed on, stepping into the hidden trail where every clue deepened the mystery and every shadow hinted at truths far beyond comprehension, making the ordinary desert feel like the threshold of something profoundly otherworldly. Night fell like a curtain, thick and suffocating, as the desert's usual quiet was fractured by a low static that hummed through the team's radios, strange signals that twisted familiar voices into whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, threading unease through their thoughts. Every crackle, every distorted syllable suggested a presence beyond comprehension, a conscious awareness lurking just beyond the circle of flashlight beams, watching, listening, calculating. The ordinary calm of the desert, the wind brushing against rocks, the distant call of a lone coyote, suddenly felt like a mask, hiding subtle movements in the shadows and patterns that the mind struggled to decipher. The team exchanged glances, tension building in silence, hearts synchronizing with the unnerving rhythm of static bursts and faint, urgent whispers that hinted at warnings or perhaps taunts. Equipment buzzed inexplicably. Compasses wavered, cameras intermittently flickered, and the air itself seemed charged with an invisible energy that tightened muscles and focused every nerve. Then, at the edge of one beam of light, movement, quick, subtle, human-shaped, vanished before any could react, leaving behind a raw, unanswerable question hanging in the cool desert air, a moment that made the ordinary world feel impossibly distant and unreliable. Fear mingled with fascination, every instinct screaming both retreat and the irresistible pull of discovery, and in that silence, the desert whispered truths no one could yet grasp. With nothing concrete to explain, the team was left suspended between disbelief and dread, hearts racing, imagining every possibility as the cliffhanger solidified. Someone or something had passed so close that even a heartbeat could have given it away, yet when they looked, nothing remained, only the desert's unbroken, haunting emptiness. The team gathered around flickering laptop screens, their eyes straining against the dim glow as files they had painstakingly collected over days, surveillance footage, photographs, even digital notes, began to vanish before their very eyes, corrupted in ways that no ordinary glitch could explain, each deletion precise, deliberate, as though someone or something were selectively erasing evidence of events that should never be questioned. Panic mingled with disbelief, the ordinary expectation that technology preserves memory clashing violently with the reality that here, in the shadow of Area 51, memory itself seemed negotiable, fragile, and tightly controlled by unseen hands. Attempts to recover data only revealed fragments, blurred images of inexplicable lights, shadows moving against physical laws, and faint silhouettes that left more questions than answers, igniting a gnawing suspicion that their understanding of reality was no longer sufficient. Every corrupted file whispered of limits imposed, boundaries crossed invisibly, a silent assertion of control that extended beyond the desert into the very devices meant to record the truth. The team realized that nothing was accidental, that the universe of proof they relied upon had been infiltrated, manipulated, censored in real time, and the weight of that realization pressed against their chests with a suffocating inevitability. Fear flickered alongside determination. If they stopped, the world would never know. Yet pressing forward meant confronting dangers beyond imagination, forces unaccounted for, and truths that might be too vast to bear. And yet, the pull of the unknown was irresistible. Every corrupted file, every erased video felt like a dare, challenging them to see what no one else was allowed to see. They exchanged tense glances, understanding without words that the desert, the government, or something else entirely was orchestrating a performance designed to filter the curious from the brave. The question hung thick in the air, unanswerable yet impossible to ignore. How much would you risk to uncover the truth hidden from the world? The stakes had escalated, tension coiled like a spring, and the team knew that what lay ahead would challenge not only their courage but their grasp of what reality itself could be. The night sky erupted in a spectacle that defied all reason, as streaks of light darted with impossible speed, weaving intricate geometric patterns that seemed calculated, intelligent, and utterly alien, leaving the team frozen, mouths dry, hearts hammering in disbelief. Witnesses whispered of objects that changed direction mid-flight, vanished into thin air, and reappeared impossibly elsewhere, each movement bending the rules they thought governed the universe, fracturing their sense of what was possible. The desert, once a calm expanse under countless stars, now felt like a theater of forces beyond comprehension, where every flicker of light carried meaning too vast to grasp and every shadow hinted at presence unseen. Tension rose with each pulse of illumination. The team's rational minds scrambled to reconcile data with perception while fear coiled in their stomachs, tightening with each blink as the normal world seemed to unravel before their eyes. Instruments whined and spun erratically, compasses pointing nowhere, cameras struggling to capture what defied physics, and radios crackled with a static that merged with the eerie light show above. Then, in a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, one team member screamed, a sound that shattered the fragile veil of control, and in that same instant they were gone, leaving only a void and an echo that lingered like a warning. The remaining team stood paralyzed, staring at where their companion had vanished, hearts pounding, minds racing with impossible questions, and the desert seemed to pulse around them, alive and aware, as if mocking their helplessness. That single, terrifying moment, the disappearance, the scream, the emptiness, marked the threshold into a world where ordinary rules no longer applied, leaving the audience suspended in shock, and every instinct screaming that nothing would ever feel safe or predictable again. The landscape before them was unlike anything they had imagined, a place where the desert bent strangely under unnatural lights, where jagged rocks glimmered with iridescent hues and faint hums resonated through the ground, vibrating against bones as though the earth itself was alive. Evidence of containment sprawled across the hidden site, metallic structures partially buried in sand, walls etched with symbols that defied recognition, and biological samples stored in glowing cylinders that pulsed with an eerie rhythm, neither fully organic nor entirely mechanical. The team moved cautiously, awe mixing with terror, each step revealing more signs of a reality that refused explanation. Instruments registering energies impossible by any human standard, walls that reflected light in ways that suggested consciousness, and discarded alien artifacts whose design implied intelligence far beyond comprehension. Emotional tension mounted with every discovery. The mind strained to rationalize what the senses could not, a cocktail of exhilaration, disbelief, and primal fear that made breathing feel heavy. One investigator reached toward a container, only to recoil as the contents shifted independently, swirling with colors that seemed alive, a quiet pulse resonating in time with their own heartbeat, demanding attention, respect, and fear. Ordinary logic had no place here. Every theory dissolved under the weight of the unknown, leaving only raw experience and an overwhelming sense of being intruders in a domain not meant for humans. The desert beyond seemed distant now, the stars above irrelevant, swallowed by a spectacle that was both magnificent and horrifying. Yet beauty could not dispel the menace lurking in shadows. Then came the unavoidable question, the one that pressed on their minds and hearts like the desert wind against skin. Would they report this discovery, exposing themselves to forces that clearly monitored every step, or remain silent, a secret buried with risk but preserving their lives? Silence stretched across the team, heavy and tense, as though the air itself demanded a decision, and with that hesitation, the site seemed to respond, lights flickering, symbols glowing, energy vibrating in anticipation, reminding them that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no simple retreat. Every pulse of the alien machinery, every reflection in the shimmering walls, every faint whisper of movement beyond vision, reinforced the terrifying awe of confrontation at the edge, a moment where the ordinary world and the incomprehensible collided, leaving no certainty, only the haunting clarity that reality as they knew it had been irrevocably altered. The recordings crackled to life with a voice both familiar and strained, the whistleblower's tone urgent, trembling, carrying warnings that seemed to echo not only through the speakers but through the very minds of the listeners, hinting at truths too dangerous for most to confront. Each fragment revealed more questions than answers. Cryptic references to experiments, unexplained disappearances, and forces capable of manipulating perception itself, challenging the team to distinguish fact from fear, reality from suggestion. Emotional tension surged as the host, usually composed, faltered under the weight of revelations, struggling between the instinct to broadcast the material to the world and the instinct to protect themselves from consequences that might be unimaginable. Ordinary understanding of time and space felt inadequate. The desert silence, once a backdrop, now resonated with an invisible menace, punctuating the recording's warnings with every fleeting shadow across the walls of their makeshift command center. The team exchanged glances loaded with dread and determination, torn between curiosity, survival, and the ethical burden of knowledge, feeling the profound isolation of being the only witnesses to something the world might never believe. Then the final clip played, a sequence that refused explanation. A shadowy silhouette emerged at the edge of the camera frame, approaching slowly yet deliberately, the shape impossible to identify, and before anyone could react, the feed cut to black, leaving only the echo of tension and the pounding of hearts in the suffocating quiet. The room froze, time seemed suspended, reality itself questioned, and the audience, too, was left dangling between fear and fascination, imagining what might exist just beyond perception, aware that the narrative had reached a terrifying peak, yet the true answer remained deliberately, maddeningly, out of reach. The lingering question, unspoken yet heavy, demanded reflection. What would you do if the shadows were real, if truth itself threatened the boundary between survival and exposure? When the survivors emerged from the desert, their eyes held a haunted glaze, a quiet testimony to the events that no one outside could fully comprehend, carrying with them an invisible weight that pressed against their every movement, their thoughts circling endlessly around what had been glimpsed, touched, or felt in those forbidden zones. Media reports that initially covered their expedition appeared almost immediately redacted, articles vanished, broadcasts pulled offline, leaving gaps where information should have been, amplifying the unnerving sensation that forces beyond human understanding were controlling not only perception but the very flow of knowledge. Ordinary life resumed for outsiders, yet for those who had witnessed the extraordinary, nothing seemed ordinary anymore. The hum of electricity, the flicker of lights, even the desert wind became a reminder of unseen eyes, of secrets too vast to articulate, too dangerous to reveal. Conversations were punctuated with long pauses, nervous glances, and unspoken fear, a collective acknowledgement that some truths were buried under layers of silence, yet the question of observation lingered like a shadow in every reflective surface and every distant sound. The emotional void was palpable. Moments of laughter or relief were hollowed by memory, leaving the mind restless and alert, hyper-aware of every anomaly, every whisper, every unexplained tremor in the air. The desert, once a distant stage for their discoveries, remained alive in memory, vast and quiet yet saturated with threat and mystery, as though the land itself remembered and waited, its secrets unyielding. The audience, drawn into this narrative, is left with a provocative question to anchor reflection and comment. Do you think the truth is buried, safely hidden, or are we, even now, still being watched, shadows lingering where we cannot see, reminding us that some knowledge comes with a cost too great to ignore? The desert stretched endlessly under a velvet night sky, its calmness a deceptive veil that barely concealed the weight of unanswered questions lingering in the air, as if the land itself held memories too vast and dangerous to speak aloud. Shadows shifted subtly among the dunes, and distant flickers of light, too deliberate to be stars, played across the horizon, suggesting a presence that watched and waited, silent yet deliberate, an invisible audience that reminded every observer that the story was far from over. The wind whispered through jagged rocks and hollowed ridges, carrying the echoes of vanished explorers, lost recordings, and phenomena that defied explanation, blending ordinary desert sounds with a chorus of anomalies that teased the edges of comprehension. The night felt alive, each pulse of unseen energy, every glimmer in the distance, reinforcing the notion that some mysteries resist conclusion, that the boundary between the known and the unknowable remains fragile, tenuous, and constantly shifting. The audience is left suspended, their minds racing with possibilities, imagining what remains hidden just beyond perception, the desert itself a silent keeper of secrets that may never be fully revealed. And as the narrative closes, the final, haunting reminder lingers, pressing against thought and imagination alike. Tonight, as you close your eyes, remember, some doors once opened may never close. Did they ever really leave?